Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today I'd like to talk to you about space art. Now it's not just any space art, it's going to be the space art that is found in these Stephen Caldwell editions of the Galactic Encounters book. And that is Settlers in Space, Aliens in Space, and Space Patrol, Star Quest, and The Fantastic Planet. So they didn't work real hard on the titles, but these books are really awesome, okay? These books are full of the arts of people like Angus McKee and Chris Foss, for instance. So, there's McKee, I'm pretty sure, just at a glance. This is basically the kind of art that you see in these books. There is some carryover here to other art books you may have seen. And it's just beautiful stuff. So I thought that we would do the top-down view of the books to get a more appreciation of them. So I'm just looking forward to showing it to you and talking about the artists and also, my impressions of what I'm seeing. We have a Star Quest there, and we got the Fantastic Planet. And it's funny, some of these have actual wrappers, and I think some of them are it's actually right on the cover too. So these are nicely made books. Let's see, what do we have here? Oh, okay, that's just a straight old black cover there. So there's Settlers in Space. So these things are very well done. One of the really nice things about these books is that they repeatedly feature the same artists from the time, people who were doing a lot of cover work. And a lot of these artists, I think, at the time, were probably not that well known outside of, the science fiction community. So this was also a great way to get their art in front of future science fiction fans, myself included. So let's go to the top-down view and take a deeper look at these wonderful science fiction art books. Okay, so here we go, getting started with the first of the Galactic Encounters books, and that's going to be Aliens in Space, an illustrated guide to the inhabited galaxy by Stephen Caldwell. The galaxy is a big place. That's not much of a claim, right? So if you just look at the construction quality of these books are all superbly put together. I mean, this is an old book, and it is still in fantastic condition. And let me see here. We're looking at copyright because, while we're enjoying ourselves here, we're definitely going to geek out on different things like this. But of course, I won't try to hold us up for too long with things like this. And you can see a lot of interesting names here, a lot of luminaries of the art world, including Jim Burns is listed there, Fred Gambino. Some of the names that are just jumping out at me right away. Angus McKee is listed there, Terry Oakes, Tony Roberts, Nick Fox. I mean, there are just a lot of world-class people who were getting their art featured in these books. And I mean, back when these books were coming out, that must have been a heck of a coup to have for your art career. Now, sometimes you just miss it, but I am not seeing anything that would constitute a copyright. So I was just hoping to find a copyright. But anyway, this is Crescent from New York, and I know the Terran Trade Federation book, I believe, is a British book. You can see it says $2 up in the corner there. I wonder if you can still find it for $2. So if we take a look at this, there's a lot of interesting things that they did repeatedly throughout the Terran Trade books, which then got crossed over to here. You have Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, some of these other terms that they're using here, first featured prominently in the Terran Trade books. So there's some nice consistency there, even though they don't call these Terran Trade Authority books. Now, to be sure, there are other Terran Trade Authority books aside from the one that I have there. I think there's maybe one or two others. So as we start looking through the art here, it's just interesting that there's a crossover. So, I mean, I'm not going to harp on the crossover. I don't mean to harp on it at all. I'm just mentioning it because it's interesting to me that all of this stuff was purposed and repurposed in order to do these things. But this is just how beautiful these books are. So we're just going to page through them and just enjoy ourselves and just look at some art. Now this, I believe this is the work of Angus McKee. And I mean, and I remember as a kid being really influenced by this spaceship when I would draw my own spaceships as a kid. This is such a novel, interesting design. You know, back at the time when this was done, I believe the Concorde program was still, you know, a pretty big deal. It was the late 70s, and the Concordes were still flying, and they were still flying well. And so, you know, you can see the influence there. So, you know, the writing in these often is supportive of the images, and sometimes you'll recognize some of these works of art as book covers, but probably not as often as you'd like. But once again, you know, in this video, I just want to give you a chance to just enjoy, you know, the amazing artwork of these. The art is not credited right on the image, so in order to know who the artist is, there might be, let's just see, is there anything even in the back here that kind of brings that all together? And it doesn't, but I mean, it's also not terribly important. 1979 is when this came out. So we're looking at just a year or two, a few years after the first Terran Trade Authority books. And so that's where we might actually see, you know, this was also printed in Italy. So one of the other really cool things about this is the amount of imagination and world building that could go on inside, you know, anyone's head, especially a young person's mind, as they're reading a book like this. You know, you're given coordinates and distances and other things that make up the planet that you're supposed to be seeing. But, you know, also what you're seeing here is just some really fantastic artwork. Now, there's a little bit of a glare, and I'm sorry for that, but, you know, on some level, we do have to light the books. So, but just look at this great old-fashioned science fiction art. I mean, this is just like such a throwback here. It's so well done. So if let me see if I just tip that like that a little bit. That helps bring down the glare a little and brings up the color. And that's just what we want. I have the auto white balance on this one just set to automatic. Sometimes you choose them. And you know, it's often interesting that you know that some of this art was made for book covers and other projects, and sometimes they're just individual works of personal art by the artists, and then they're, you know, the people who wrote the book are just putting their own story to the artwork, which is kind of a fun thing to do. And you know, I know that Harlan Ellison did that with an entire book of art, and I think a Czech artist put together a bunch of really interesting paintings, and Harlan wrote a story for each one of them. And I mean, he certainly had the skill to pull something like that off. And I have seen this image represented several times in several different books, and it's well done. And we're just enjoying the art. That almost has kind of a Cthulhu kind of feel to it. And I mean, not entirely, but, you know, a little. That's interesting. And I'm sure that's not the point, but it just kind of has that feel. And I've seen this work of art turn up several times in different places. And it's a great anthropomorphized, you know, kind of reptilian monster. For me, quality, you know, the quality of some of this art is that it is rather basic looking. They can't all be Frank Frazetta, right? They can't all be Angus McKee. They can't all be Chris Foss. You know, there are lots of other artists working at different levels who were all doing, you know, varied types of work. Now, I know I have seen this work of art also used as the cover for Samuel Delany's one book, and I'm thinking it's Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand, but it's probably actually a different one. And I mean, then you jump up to this kind of level of work, and I mean, this is just astounding. This is beautifully done. Great use of light and shadow. The detail of the people going on in there is really, really well done. I think that's worth a lift up to have a better look. You know, that work of art is incredibly well done, I think. And it just takes time to become a good artist. So sometimes you're seeing art from different stages in careers. Some of these people may have gone on to be much better. The name of that planet is Aquatica. They didn't work hard on that one. This one also turns up in a few other books. I think this is actually in the Terran Trade Authority 2000 to 2100 book, as is this one. But I mean, that's a fascinating work of art for a kid to see. I remember the first time I saw that as a kid, that one kind of blew my mind a little bit. That's a wild concept. It's actually pretty straightforward in its design too. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's a Chris Foss. No idea what's going on there, but it's an interesting concept for an alien creature. There's a mythological theme on that one. I believe that this was an old cover for, it was Planet of Death, I think, or something along that lines. It was one of those books. Was that a Harry Harrison series? I'm trying to remember. Then, of course, we have the very back page, which tells us that it is from 1979. So that wraps up the first one. So that's the Galactic Encounters, Aliens in Space. This is the next book in the series, Settlers in Space, also by Stephen Caldwell. So let's have a good look at this book. Of course, we'll start out here by drinking some coffee, which will be edited out. Settlers in Space, the fight for survival on distant worlds. We have a Stephen Caldwell space adventure book that is in incredibly good condition for considering how old it is. So let's take, now that we know, oh, well, you know, maybe that's not in such incredible condition. I'm going to leave that in the video. I was wrong. 1980. So the 80s have begun. But did Big Hair start right away in the 80s? I mean, I know that Big Hair showed up eventually, and I remember really liking Big Hair in the 80s because I was young. But I don't know that it had arrived just yet. So here we have 1980 and all the usual suspects of Crown Publishers Incorporated. And this book appears to have some issues with staying together, but we're not going to worry about that. So Settlers in Space, maybe this front matter here can give us a clue. The ships of the Galactic Federation's Survey and Preliminary Study Service ceaselessly range among the alien stars and unexplored planets which lie beyond the distant perimeter. Contact with the bustling central worlds of the Federation is difficult and infrequent as they face the dangers of the vast unknown. And of course they have more to say there. Stephen Caldwell joined the Galactic Federation Security Force in 2393 and quickly rose to the rank of Group 1 Battle Force Commander. During his 15 years of active service, he traveled to all parts of the Federation and was awarded the Andromeda Star for his part in the settlement of the perimeter worlds. And seriously, of course he did. And officers are always getting awards and merits and all kinds of shit like that. But it's the NCOs that do all the work. So anyway, enough side commentary. Let's have a look at what's going on in here. And that's just a little dig at my officer friends out there. You know it's not true. We know you worked hard. So here we have Monksfield, and so right away this would appear to be the work of Angus McKee. He has such a distinct style, and I'm just going to bring that in right away, because just look at that insanity. And I mean, by insanity, I mean just look at that beautiful, beautiful use of color and shape and form. At first glance, it looks kind of basic, and then once you really start to look into it, you see there's an enormous amount of good work being done there. And there's just these little worlds within worlds. And this is just the kind of stuff that I love about art. There's a lot going on in this artwork. It's its own self-contained world. And, what's more, there's a lot of imagination at work there. Angus McKee's work is just fantastic. He's well worth looking up on the internet. Now, I remember always loving this artist's work. I'm sorry to say I don't know who this artist is, but I have seen his work elsewhere in other books, and I've actually seen, a series of his art with these particular works, and I've always enjoyed them. Now, I am trying to keep my hands off of the art, because you don't want to see my hands, you want to see the art, but also trying to keep the glare down as much as possible. And I mean, that's just an imagination stimulating work of art. An interesting thing, this great book is not staying together. So if you just take a closer look at the other ship in that view, and then you see that there's just so much going on in there. And I mean, when you're looking at art to stir your imagination, maybe to inspire a story of your own, or just to enjoy that, unbridled flight of fancy that your young mind certainly could go through. I mean, especially before phones, which I think tend to deaden the senses for things like that a little bit in the long run. Here you had to look at a world like this and then delve deep with your own creativity. Because no matter what the artist had in mind, you've still got your own impression of it. I just thought that was worth a slightly deeper dive. So again, the theme of this book is settlers, so I would imagine those previous pictures were about getting to the planet, and then this is about being there. And this reminds me a little bit of a Haglund, and I've always thought if I ever owned an extra vehicle, I would love to own a Haglund. So here we have a ship, an airship coming in for landing, and the Osprey didn't come out for a long time after this, and I mean a long time. It would be interesting to see what the timeline is on the Osprey in relation to that flying vehicle, because that is apparently the exact same design. I mean, this book is from 1980. Was the Osprey in development? I mean, it would have been a secret at that point, right? So that is really fascinating that an artist kind of just figured, rotating engines on wings would work. They had probably been testing things similar to the Osprey well before that, so that could have lent inspiration too. We do have people in there. Unfortunately, the thing that we want to see on that is just dead center on the page, so the rocket in the center does not really show itself that well. Oh, geez. This is hurting a little bit. So this is some kind of seagoing vessel. That's really interesting. And what does it say here? There's an enormous amount of glare there. I just want to try to minimize that glare for you. It's good lighting, but these glossy pages. Another beautiful use of color. These books are just sumptuous. I have always loved this work of art. And there it is, kind of on a center form there. But, when you're young and you look at a picture like that, you think, where are they going and what are they doing, and what would you be doing if you were there? I don't know how practical that design is. Of course, putting something in front of the blast of the engine, I would think that nothing could survive that heat, but it looks cool. This book is unfortunately fallen apart, just a little. Luckily, I have some book repair materials now, so I'll see what I can do about fixing it. That is great. That is just a really nice old-fashioned work of art. I wonder if that is to a novel of some kind. That is really, really nice. And again, with some of these, I don't really feel that there's a need to say much other than just, man, check out this artwork, because it's really awesome. This is another work of art that I've seen across many, many books, different things like that, but it is incredibly well done. I like the leading lines of perspective and the great use of color on this one. I don't think you want to be flying that close to that thing. That doesn't look safe. That is a great representation of a pterodactyl type creature, because I know they were drawing them differently for a long time, so that's a good updated representation of that. I like that concept. That's almost a commercial concept in its approach there. Having a landing hub like that. There's another oldie that I've always really enjoyed, and I've certainly seen that one elsewhere. These kind of structures on a space vessel kind of make you wonder about stability and other things like that, but also as a flight of fancy. It's just really, really well done, very interesting. I would imagine that this might have been some concept work that someone did for, Pan Am, when, companies back then were definitely thinking about the future. The idea of the future, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was still a place that was attainable. We had not become so thoroughly enamored with a dystopian view of the world and the future. We had not completely bought into it to the point where we could no longer see a future. We had not become so wrapped up in the postmodern that that we realized that there could be some kind of a future where things like this were possible. A tower that rises from the ground into space, or the edge of space anyway, is a fascinating idea and would be an achievement. And we're much more fixated on the negative than the positive now. And I guess artists like writers like Kim Stanley Robinson are trying to write more positively oriented works that show us a possible brighter future. But I guess the reality is that there is quite a bit of damage done, so we've got some fixing to do before we can get to that bright Pan Am tower in the sky. But we can still do it. This is by the way, the color scheme that I often think of the most when I think of Angus McKee's work. At first glance, it looks like the way a kid might color it in. It looks unsophisticated, but if you start to actually really look at it and you take a deep dive into the work and you start to study the use of color and shadow and shade, you realize that you're in the hands of a master there. He's very, very good. Sometimes I wonder if people who dream up spaceships for art that's going to wind up on book covers or in magazines, they just kind of wing it. I've always found it fascinating that sword fighting has always been kept alive in our visions of the future. There's always a possibility that if we're still fighting each other in the future, or fighting aliens, I suppose, as in this case, we might use bladed weapons to do that, or something worse. There's another, really wonderfully textured work. In fact, I'm going to kind of bring that in. The texture on that is just really, really neat. And there's so much going on in there. Now, I could be wrong, and that's fine. I don't mind being wrong, because you can be easily corrected, right? But I think that that's Jim Burns. There's another oldie but a goodie. I have always liked this thing that you would see in 70s and 80s space art. Aside from the fact that, a painting just looks different than digital. Very few people make the effort to have this painterly look in digital. It does happen, but I think that digital painting emphasizes other things. If you've ever worked on a Cintiq, it's a different experience than paper. But I've always loved this idea of these hatches opening on the side of these various space vessels that appear in this artwork, and then this craft is flying into there, it's docking, and that just allows a lot of room for imaginative play, right? You can just see or imagine, it's going in there, what's going on in there, do you want to be a part of that? There appears to be some kind of land or ecosystem preservation going on in there, much like with Silent Running, something along those lines. And there's the final image, and as we said, this is a 1980 book. So 1980, but probably before Big Hair. All right. That's another book down. We'll get started on the next one in a minute. Next up is Fantastic Planet, also by Stephen Caldwell, also by the same publishing company. Same quality of book, same construction of book. Different color end papers here. A book that appears to be in good shape. I don't think this one has fallen apart. So here we have The Fantastic Planet, a world of magic and mystery. We've now inserted the element of magic, I think. The other ones were definitely more science fiction. Perhaps this one is too. It says here, The Fantastic Planet, a world of magic and mystery, Stephen Caldwell. The Survey and Preliminary Study Service probably demands a degree of courage and dedication far beyond any other branch of the Galactic Federation's forces. The men who explore the furthest frontiers of the Federation confront the unknown in the knowledge that they have only their own initiative to rely upon. All right, I've read that twice. I'm not doing it again. And of course, they don't have the prime directive, so they could probably really screw things up if they wanted to. So I guess they better be careful. So here's the note about Stephen Caldwell, who joined the Galactic Federation in 2093 and quickly rose to the rank of Group 1 Battle Force Commander again. So it took him 15 years to do that. Now, how long does it take to become a commander in the Navy? Because I think, commander is a Navy rank at this point, in the U.S. military anyway. So, what else? He was awarded the Andromeda Star. Now, hold on. What was he awarded in the last one? Jesus criminy, what's going on here? Oh, no, it was the Andromeda Star in the last one, too. So, I don't know what the hell you have to do to get the Andromeda Star. Probably have a friend who's a general. It's just another military dig for those of us who were enlisted. All right, so here we go. Fantastic Planet. We have the cover. And this is a pretty basic style of artwork. I would not call it too complex. The proportions are a little off. Oh, let's check out copyright on this one, right? Let's see what's, it's also by Crescent. This is also 1980. It was a busy year for them. So here we're presented with another nice introduction. It's definitely got some meat on the introduction there. And what a beautiful work of art. That is a great rendition of an alien landscape. And I mean, I know that's not by Chelsea Bonestell. I mean, maybe that is by Chelsea Bonestell, but it certainly is influenced down here, you know, more than any other part of it. It certainly seems to be influenced by Chelsea's work, but I'm not entirely sure who that is. Perhaps we should just go back here real quick. Please bear with me, art nerds. So Angus McKee, Terry Oakes, and Joe Patagno are definitely in here still. Les Edwards later. I just wanted to see if it says who that is up front here right away. And I don't think it does. But boy, that is a nice use of color. I mean, this foreground element, and you know, and even though the background is not really falling into atmospheric perspective or anything like that, because they're on maybe on a planet with no atmosphere, it really, really looks good. It's pretty well done. I can relate to being a skinny dude, although I've never worn a loincloth. We'll have to censor that for YouTube. You don't want to get in trouble. That's an interesting kind of industrial landscape there. I do like that. I do think it's a shame in these books that there's no artist credit per image, per page. Even just in fine print it would have been nice, but still, it is nice to see this art. It's an interesting juxtaposition of the old and the new there. I like that. And for some reason, I was just briefly reminded of a Miyazaki kind of scene, although, you know, Miyazaki has more of a watercolor approach. It looks like watercolor anyway. Doesn't mean that it is. It's just a really nice washed look on his towns and scenes. So there we see the artist's name, but I'm sorry to say it just doesn't interpret to anything I can read there. It's a little obscure, but that is an interesting work. And this is something I would have loved as a kid. So I imagine the first time that I saw this, I totally loved it. I probably drew that one without a doubt. You see the book coming apart just a little bit there. That's a shame. I'm not selling them, so it doesn't matter. But I think they're just drying out. They're just old, you know. A book that's been around for 50 years, it's going to show a little age. So this artist's last name is Fox, but I don't have no idea. Oh, that is interesting. So that has kind of a post-apocalyptic feel to it as well. But boy, I really do love just delving into art like this. I almost wonder if they grabbed a shot of Frank Zane from back in the 80s and then just kind of transformed it into, you know, this interesting work of art. To maintain that kind of shredded look while living the barbarian lifestyle of probably very few meals in between towns would be really difficult. That is truly a fantasy, isn't it? To be that shredded and that muscular without regular access to a gym, a weight set, and probably some really great enhancement drugs is really difficult. Nobody's born like that. But it is kind of funny to try to imagine the barbarian trying to track down, you know, back then it would have been a Gold's Gym, you know, would have, or, you know, something along that lines. This book is totally going to heck. It's falling apart on me. All right, let's just try to get it together here and stay calm. All righty, so there we go. You know, that's a little more realistic representation of a man. Now that helmet, isn't that interesting? I think, does that remind you a little bit of the helmet that was in Gladiator later, the one that Russell Crowe wore as Maximus? This guy looks like he is just too busy to pose properly for this picture, and so he's got that very smug look on him. And it could be a little cold there because she's not wearing a lot of clothing. I remember this one from years ago, and I just remember loving the idea, the whole, you know, you are the person in the work of art kind of fantasy of just looking at a high-flying machine like that and being the pilot that's flying it. And the side entrance door thing kind of reminds me of the old Helldivers and some of the other larger World War II two-man aircraft that were designed back then. They used to have to make things big. They didn't have the tech to make them smaller. So you would have actual doors on the sides of fighter aircraft and attack aircraft and stuff. There's like a really typical kind of, this is the only image I've seen like that in the series so far, a really typical sword and sorcery heroic figure with a, you know, a woman almost literally hanging on his arm and riding some kind of, you know, fantastic creature. And I'm trying to think if had Star Wars come along with another installment to maybe influence, but no, you know, I think this is kind of coming whole cloth there because it's only 1980. So it says here, Chapter 5, Battle Dawn, Ship's Log, Day 59. Have arrived at our destination in the company of the Shaftoan. Tribes from many parts of the planet are assembled here. We must assist somehow. So screw the Prime Directive. No, I'm just kidding. They don't have the Prime Directive. Well, I wonder who this artist is. He keeps showing up in here, and that is absolutely gruesome. I love that use of color, though. Holy cow. Look at those blues. That's such an excellent use. I mean, that is, a, you know, truly a grim subject, but he's wearing a pinky ring. Good. Good monster. No, I'm not against pinky rings. It's okay. Interesting. Shattered sword. He appears to be somewhat hurt, but still mounted on his steed. That's a great rendition of a kind of war-crazed centaur-like creature. And I think that guy down there on the ground should get the hell out of the way. Oh, there you go. See? Everyone's happy to use a sword and a spear till a tank shows up. So there you go. Isn't that interesting? This book is like totally falling apart. That's a shame. If we were lining up the barrels, there we go. Barrels somewhat lined up. You're not going to need that sword and that shield once those guns start to unleash. It's practically a close-in weapon system. That does seem to be somewhat inspired by Raquel Welch of the time, or possibly a little earlier. I'm just looking at what's going on in the background here, and it would appear that there is a battle raging. So, as with all fantasy settings, we have combat and battles raging. Although this one does at least hint at mixing in science fiction with the sword and sorcery theme of this. You can be a barbarian like that. If you can eat 6 meals a day, you'll be good to go. So. That is actually a pretty nice work of art there. That is well done. Great use of color and form. I really like that one. We're drawing near to the end. It says the nightmare ends. Ship's log, day 69. The rebels have gained control of the Torcal city, but skirmishing continues outside the main building. Now that it's over, it seems incredible that these pitiful creatures have dominated an entire world and its people for so long. Have been unable to discover their original home. There's plenty of work here for the planetary welfare organizations. And let's take a break. We got machinery going on in the background. Maybe they don't want planetary welfare. I mean, Jesus, let them handle it themselves. Even in the future, it looks like the Western world is interfering in the affairs of people who aren't part of the technological first world, as they used to call it. Also, I think this is a funny thing. You know, the name on here is it's Torqueral, and that reminds me of the scene from Gentlemen Broncos, where they talk about how you could add a ton or an al or an inus to the end of a word, and it immediately becomes a fantasy word. If you've never seen Gentlemen Broncos, I do recommend it. It's I actually cheered at the end of the movie. It was so freaking good. So we're just going to go with the noise in the background. It's no big deal. Welcome to the modern world. There's always something running in the background in a house. Oh, that's very nice. I like that. That's an interesting kind of biosphere type habitat. I do like that one. Great use of color and form. Our next book is Star Quest, An Incredible Voyage into the Unknown, also by Stephen Caldwell. It looks like he's still only one Andromeda star. Hopefully he's not some desk-bound military guy. He actually got out in the field and did something. So let's see here, 1979. Oh, this is an earlier one. So also there's a different end paper color here. I kind of like that color. It really works. How's that look on camera? Oh, that's good. There's the usual slight glare. Sorry about that. This is about the best angle that works for lighting the book. And that is a Boris Vallejo work. I mean, even from a distance, we'd recognize Boris's style, right? I mean, he's just very distinctive. And so the outer part of this book appears to be in good shape. There appears to be some creature, organism living there that's long dead. And this nice use of color here. It's almost a Buzz Lightyear adjacent type armor going on there. Oh, and this one is dedicated to Kevin, whoever you are, from 1982. This is Star Quest, An Incredible Voyage into the Unknown. This is a Crescent by New York. And this art has been around. And we start this one off with this absolutely beautiful work of art. And what is the theme on this one? Let's make sure we got it right. This is a starfaring voyage into the unknown. And boy, that is incredibly well done. I mean, it's not about practicality all the time when it comes to spaceship design, right? Sometimes it's just, how freaking cool can it look? And there's really a lot going on in that one, too. Let's just get a close-in look at the real design beauty of this. And I don't know that this is a Foss. It's probably just maybe Foss inspired, but oh wait, I think the artist initials are down here at the bottom. That's a great way to sign a work of art, although I don't know what PE stands for, sorry to say. We have insignia there. There just really is a lot going on in this, and it's just kind of worth looking at. If we can get the light to angle in there, that's nice. And I really like the way the medium that it's moving through is pulling on the ship like a mist, cloud type formation, maybe a nebula. That is really, really well done. I really like that one. Oh, I'm liking this one too. This is, once again, very nice. You know, you don't see pink a whole lot turn up in a work of art like that, so that is fascinating use of that color, and it really, really works. But this has something that as I've mentioned before, I really like in artwork, and that is the landing port that goes into an inner world in the art. A lot of old artwork shows like another room where you could go, but you can't go. You can only imagine what is in the rooms beyond. Filmmakers who are a step above in their craft will often show camera views that go through to other rooms that you don't get to walk into because you're just in the room with the characters and you don't know what lay beyond. That kind of what's happening elsewhere, in a work of art has always really fascinated me. And when I was a kid and I didn't have any artistic understanding of it, I still loved it. And even once I've understood it for what it really is in the psychology of art, it's still incredibly fascinating to me. And I haven't lost any enjoyment for it. Now, when I look at these shapes, these organic shapes, and this stone texture here, and some of the other more suggestive elements of the art and the design, I could be wrong after all of that preamble, but this looks like a work by Jim Burns, who is somebody who I really, really like. I really love his work. And let's see if Jim Burns is, of course, one of the artists. Peter Elson is what the PE stands for. That's great. So we know who we're dealing with there. Peter Elson made a great spaceship. Jim Burns is listed throughout here, page 8 or 9. So there, okay, so it is a Jim Burns. I'll pat myself on the back later. I really, really like that one, though. That's an interesting concept, making a landing port out of a statue. And you do see, especially in Jim's earlier work, that he would use this kind of stone texture. It's in the great book Planet Story, which is Harry Harrison and Jim Burns collaborated on a really great book. I'll do a nice walkthrough on that book sometime soon. And Planet Story can still be picked up for like $12 to $18 used on Amazon. I went looking for it, a little while ago. I have my own copy, but it'd be nice to have an even better copy if I could find one, but it's hard to find them in mint condition. And mine was in mint condition, but it just got used and loved, and so, it's been through the ringer. Here's another great work. The art in this book is exceptional. This is a much better edition than some of the other ones. Great ship design. I mean, it's not about practicality. It's about how freaking cool is that ship. And that red background, red, orange, dark, fading into darkness. And you would have to stand for a long time to die inside a spacesuit. I guess once it runs out of air, it ain't going to be a long time. Morbid. So here we are. And of course, this seems, inspired by 2001. And here we have another landing port. And a Pan Am ship heading in there. And here's Pan Am envisioning a bright future, a nice bright commercial future for us all. And they didn't envision the internet coming along to kind of pull the rug out from under people's hopes and dreams and expectations, right? Who'd have thought that the number one thing that would come out of technologically uniting the world would be mostly negativity? They didn't catch that one on Star Trek, did they? So this is a beautiful work of art and a wonderful concept. I love the concept of a larger ship with the smaller ships. We have a mothership kind of thing going on there. Excellent use of space and color. This guy was a real challenger to Chris Foss in this regard. I wonder why his career didn't lead to greater things. Peter Elson, I mean, perhaps it did lead to great things and I'm just not aware of it. Peter Elson is someone I'm not familiar with, but I am really liking his work when I see it here in this book. And that certainly has a much more fanciful look to it. It's one of those kind of things when you see it in a work of art, you can certainly put yourself in there and wanting to experience that. Thought-provoking mixture of the old and the new, which is something that I really appreciate in a work of art. Now, there are people writing these things, so this trouble that we see here is deliberate. There are several works of art like this that I've seen over the years that feature kind of like a jet-powered monorail system, and I do like that concept. That's a great use of green. Well, there's a lot of nuclear explosions going on down at the bottom of that planet, so this is not exactly a happy time, but this is a well done work of art. That ship is a strange mixture of kind of old and new ideas. And that's definitely an artifact type ship or installation of some kind. We're continuing with the artifact theme. Not entirely sure what's going on in that image, but it is kind of interesting. That is like a molten plasma type weapon melting that poor ship. If you've ever worked at an Air Force base, you can certainly relate to this picture. It's the sound of freedom, right? I really like the use of perspective and color in this one too, the shape and the forms. It's very nice. Can't get enough of spaceships hanging out in low Earth orbit. Low planetary orbit, I should say. Here's another like a monorail type concept, a tube type monorail. I really like that. It's pretty cool. Just a slight shade of Logan's Run going on there, right? The movie. And we are just enjoying the art. Now that is fantastically done. I'm not seeing any indication of who that artist is, but you know, we certainly, as we've been looking through these books, we've seen several of these, and I really am enjoying them all. They're very nice. But this is exceptionally well done. Let's take a closer look. Some kind of insignia there. The most amazing thing about looking at art like this is nothing is explained to you. So you create the explanation for everything. That really is the best part. great perspective. You know, the foreground element of looking through like the sandstone and red rocks kind of American Southwest type formation is really neat. There's some kind of damage going on to that ship. And another great final image. I really like that one too. It's really interesting. Oh, and there it mentions that Stephen Caldwell was born in 47. It might be fun to interview Stephen Caldwell. I wonder if he's still out there. This next one is the Space Patrol, the official guide to the Galactic Security Force, for which I believe Stephen Caldwell got some kind of insignia. The difference with this one is that the art is made right into the book itself, right into these boards. I actually really like that. I've made a few books here and there on blurb over the years, and I've always just done them this way because I really like this kind of approach. Wrappers can get frayed edges and all kinds of stuff. This always appears to be a very durable way to do this, especially when you've got a book that is going to probably initially when it was conceived was probably meant to be for younger people who are, you know, notoriously hard on books, as I know I was, because I would just look through them voraciously and use them, and you know, and you're eating a bowl of cereal and looking at the book and drinking this or that, and so, you know, this can just be wiped off. It's not a bad idea, really, when you think about it. So there's a book plate. It doesn't actually, you know, there's nothing listed as whose library that is supposed to be for, that book plate, but it's Boris. So that's a nice book plate. Oh, Kevin. Kevin. We had a cat that used to live out in the backyard, and we called him Kevin. So we used to like to give the stray cats in the old yard in our old city home human names. So that was given as a gift in 1986. I think I graduated in 1985. So let's see. Let's go check out 1980 is the copyright on this one. So there's more work in here by Peter Elson, who, you know, in the last book that we looked at was just fantastic. Fred Gambino is in there. Colin Hay. That's what CH stands for. Some of that art that we were looking at is Colin Hay's work, and I forgot about Colin. I really also enjoy his work. It's just been years since I've looked at it. Definitely a fan. Sorry about that, Colin. I guess that guy goes by Melvin. That's all it is, the guy with the obscure name who did all that fantasy work. So that makes sense. Just trying to work some of this out here, who we're dealing with, because it's nice to credit the artists as well as the writer. So once again, we had this nice interview, or I'm sorry, once again, we have this nice introduction. The patrol needs you. You know, militarism was definitely something that people were shamelessly foisting on the public in the 80s, shall I say. I don't know that it's as bad as it is, you know, then as it is now. I don't know. I don't think that anybody would fall for it like they did back then. Still, it is kind of interesting the way it works its way into science fiction and military science fiction and fantasy. It's funny looking at this guy. Just maybe a little, he looks like Scott Sonnen, who is someone who was a martial arts trainer of mine and friend for many years. I'm not saying it's a one-to-one match or anything, but there's a similarity. So if we take a close look at this, there's like something going on in the background, and like, did these guys get to be in the Great Space Patrol? Because it, you know, they look interested. There's always time to check your nails while you're blasting the shit out of people with your gun there. Let's see. Nice watch. See, like, that big chunky watch. Now, at one time, people were trying to make smaller and smaller technical watches. Over the years, people have really liked, like, big, heavy-duty, chunky watches like that, too. And I don't think I would want that to be miniaturized, even if it could be. So one of the interesting things about the Apple Watch is that I think they made it a little bigger, and it made it seem a little more appealing to me. That is a lot of stuff to wear too, though. I mean, like on a hot day, You'd be sweating your ass off in that thing. It's not pleasant. They always make it look so pleasant in pictures like this, but you know, if you've ever worn a combat helmet for like 8 hours, Jesus, it ain't fun. Very interesting. No idea what's going on in there. I mean, clearly a brain scan of some kind. Oh, you know, I'm not talking because I'm just kind of looking at this, kind of drinking it in. I love it. There's just a lot of different things going on there. Kind of a repurposing of parts that we're all used to. I mean, you know, I could fly a spaceship like that. Of course, is that a rocket or is it a spaceship? Very nice use of color and light in that one. Lighting elements. Was it Colin Hay who was, I think, maybe very fond of these color patterns, these almost like farm fields from high altitude look that he put on a lot of his work? But I don't see his distinctive CH anywhere. That is a nice one though. I really like it. So here we are off into the darkness. Oh, that's nice. That's well done. And certainly reminiscent of things we've seen before. Interesting spaceship design. I'm not really sure the where or the what. You can only guess at the practicality. This would appear to be more work by Angus McKee. His art always strikes me as very simple and kind of flat and sometimes even dull, you know, at first. But then, you know, what you have to do is stop for a minute and dive deeper. And you see that a lot of these things are faces. They are representations, mechanical representations of faces and bodies and different things like that. That just starts to make it more fascinating, and then just such a creative use of all of these garish colors coming together. It's really neat. I enjoy his work greatly. This is really nice. That's a great work. What a shame you can't see what's going on inside there. I love that element of, you know, what's going on in the places where you can't quite go within the work. Another fascinating ship concept. And we're just enjoying the artwork, just looking through the book. Oh, well, there's just some interesting elements in this one. Let's take a closer look. What do we have here? We have small figures operating the craft. You can always appreciate detail work in something like this. That's well done. Well, that's an unfortunate moment. That looks like a collision. In the vastness of space, they still managed to hit each other, although maybe hitting each other was deliberate. And it looks like, even though they're bashing into each other as a form of attack, they're still managing to retaliate too. You know, it's funny, when you look at that as a kid, you just think like, wow, that's really cool. And then, you know, like after military service and watching a bunch of wars go rolling by, you look at it and you think, oh man, somebody's kids are on that thing. Interesting insignia too. Boy, look at that. That is really something. There's a lot going on there. But we can just enjoy their war for the fun of it, since their war is not really happening. There is a lot of detail going on in that image, though. This artist, He definitely did not phone it in. That's a great close-up of what is probably a gun system of some kind. It's definitely like a World War II kind of throwback. Now that's a nice old-fashioned looking work. As is that. Oh, that's nice. Another great use of light and color and perspective. Very nice. I think one squid like that might not be a problem for your super sophisticated underwater vehicle, but a whole bunch of them, you've got trouble. Interesting work there. That's really something. What's going on with that guy down there? He almost looks like a priestly kind of figure, doesn't he? There's more detail on the craft itself. Hopefully those control handles lower, because you would not want to be reaching up like that for hours. Oh, the Soldiers of Peace. I didn't check that out before. Of course, there's the Soldiers of Peace. Domestic Security Trooper, grade CD security clearance. 5 Terran years. 5 years. God, that's a long hitch. Just a fantastic science fictional representation there, as is that. I remember, as a kid, just loving vehicles, like strange vehicles and alien environments. Who didn't love that kind of stuff when they were a kid? It just like triggers the imagination. And these books are full of stuff like that. It's just so fascinating. So much fun. There's the final work. It's kind of interesting. And I suppose that if you're reading the copy that's in here, sometimes these images really add up to something as well, and because I have not read all of them, of course. I just enjoy the art. Okay, and here we are with the final book in the series for the Galactic Encounters, and that is Worlds at War, an illustrated study of interplanetary conflict, once again by Stephen Caldwell. And here we have a nice military motif right there on the front, a very interesting looking ship. And it says here, despite the vast breadth of the Galactic Federation and the many worlds and races it encompasses, it is nevertheless a minute speck on the rim of the great wheel of our galaxy. All right, and here we have these stunning orange end papers and a book that appears to be otherwise in good shape. All of the books have these black boards with a white ink and such. This is also by Crescent. We'll take a quick look here just to acknowledge. It does feel a little flimsy back here. This thing might be going to pieces too. It's also 1980, so they just kind of put this whole series out all at once, obviously, between 1979 and 1980. So they worked fast, got it out for the kids and the enthusiasts, and 30 years later, the adults who collect them. Here we go. The Hyperwave War. Well, that's a great turn of phrase, isn't it? And we have all the usual suspects here. It's all the same artists: Jim Burns, Les Edwards, Peter Elson, Bob Lazell, Chris Moore, Tony Roberts, Melvin. His work is in there. Bob Lazell. So there's a lot of good artists represented there. And we start off with flying saucers, and how topical for our time, right? There's all kinds of interesting stuff going on with that, even in the news and in the government. So the data bank is historical. The subject reference is military. Period of reference is the late 24th century. And that is, as if we can divorce ourselves from that for a moment, the use of color and composition in this one is very nice. I think we'll just come in for a closer look on that because that is pretty. It's well done. And of course the color, the use of light and shape, it is reminding me of Angus McKee. All right, and on to the next one. Continuing with the flying saucer motif. I know that I have seen this as a book cover somewhere, but my goodness, I can't remember where. The Hyperwave War, Presence of Mind, part 2. So they have come up with a wonderful story to go along with these images. It's good work, such as it is. It says the Military Operations Center after the swift and devastating alien attack which decimated the Federation's high command. And then the overleaf, they go on to say other things. Here we have the ship from the front. Here's a theoretical reconstruction of alien anatomy from Baker Flight Computer Sensor records. The swiftness of the alien attack allowed them to wreak havoc, considerable havoc, among Earth's main communications centers before the defenses could react. Taken alone, this is just a really interesting work of art. They're dropping bombs. Science fiction is often about now as much as it's about some place in the future. From an urban planning perspective, I mean, thank goodness there are no tall buildings like that right next to the Capitol, right? Because that would be really ugly. Here we have very obvious work by Angus McKee. And we'll just pull in on this because there's just some really nice details here. Stark use of color, primary colors. Certainly there's mixing going on, but there's also, some of this just looks almost straight out of the tube, but it really, really works. We've got pilots in there, so we can also put ourselves in there. I wonder if that's maybe some kind of multiple rocket launching idea, or maybe, I'm not sure. It has a wonderful sense of movement and action, that's for darn sure. Well done. And there's yet again one of those science fiction images to just stir the imagination. It says, although the crew of the Ventnor had no idea what to expect in their investigation of the curious signal source that was disturbing Federal communications, they were totally unprepared for the monstrous sight that met their eyes when they emerged from warp. Well, they'd still have some momentum, so they wouldn't be there for long. Just nitpicking, right? But anyway, this reminds me of the Peter Watts story called The Island. And I don't want to give too much away about the story of The Island, and I know it ties in, I think, to his Rifters universe, but I never knew that when I first read it. I read it as a story that stood alone, and you don't need to know anything else about anything in Peter Watts' wonderful universe of stories and ideas to read The Island and thoroughly enjoy it. But there's just a vague similarity there. And if you like short stories, you're going to really love that one, I promise. Here is another tower motif showing up in the artwork, and I really, really enjoy the idea of the tower that reaches into great heights, maybe even low Earth orbit. It's a progressive, interesting idea that shows a hope for the future, which is something that science fiction is greatly devoid of. And with no hope for the future, it can be very hard to have your science fiction have what you would call a sense of wonder, which is a nice element in science fiction. I mean, we don't have to be, gosh golly, gee whiz, Flash Gordon about it, but we could still maybe use a little bit of that in our science fiction writing and storytelling. Structurally and from an engineering standpoint, that would be probably really hard to do. And it would appear that this is some kind of a plate over the planet, and there's even more underneath that. And that interiority, that actual physical interiority of the artwork is also something that I really like. And I guess if the military is going to be the subject of your art book, you're going to have things like that. And that's well done. There seems to be kind of a Peter Jones sort of influence on some of Melvin's work. I don't know that he was influenced, but I mean, when I look at this gun and these overall shapes and designs, I get that feeling. We have ships emerging from an asteroid. I think this is Peter Elson works. He does these great ships, interesting earth tones and other colors, mixing in very well with his spaceship designs. I saw this work and it was related to something to do with Dune, and I believe this was with Paul's first great jihad or crusade, as it were. I remember loving this ship design when I was a kid, and the first time I saw it elsewhere in another work of art in some other book. So then, many years later as an adult, when I saw this again, I was like, oh, there's that ship. I loved this ship design when I was a kid. And these are neat looking, almost like a lizard, crocodile kind of forms. None of them are practical for flight, right? But they are really, really practical for imagination. And this guy's not doing so well. Hopefully he can bail out. And here we have a science fiction scenario that you can just insert yourself into and let your imagination run with it. There appears to be some things going on back here. Perhaps a scuffle. And I do recall this work showing up on various book covers throughout the years too. And there's just not a lot going on in that one or that one, but I suppose this is supposed to be invasion. I was thinking exploration, but no, that's invasion. The Phelan War. Well, that guy unfortunately took a hit, and he's not doing so well. That is really well done, though. Great use of color and shape. What an excellent rendition of an explosion. Pretty cool. The amount of detail on this, I mean, it's almost like a Tibetan mandala, for goodness sakes. It's really something. I believe we've seen works that were cut off about right there showing this landing area, but then you go on to see that the ship has much more detail and a red star. So not American. And I mean, not everything in space in the future is going to be American, right? I'd hazard a guess that deep space exploration is going to be done by the Chinese way before it's done by us. Because you got to be willing to risk to do something like that. And they are. I thought this reminded me just, in a minor sense of the B-58 Hustler. The Hustler had a big underlined center tank like that was a travel pod sort of situation, but could also house, I suppose, fuel, but more importantly, a nuclear weapon. It was a medium-range bomber. I don't think it was ever an interceptor. It was a medium-range bomber only. Would have made a great interceptor. It was very fast. I've always been a fan of this one. This is a great image. There's a lot going on in it once you start to really look at it closely. And this is the same use of color and light and shadow as the one where we saw the two vehicles, the black and the brown one, Russian and American insignia, that they were like two giant beetles facing off with each other. That was in one of the earlier books. There's an interior space with girder work. I think for a long time people figured that the interior of large spacecraft would have girders like that. You know, girders were just such a fixture of building and construction and everything else. And I mean, even to this day, they are if you've worked in a factory or a warehouse. So, you know, it's just logical to think that they'll also be in our future spaceship interiors. Girders are a great place to have equipment hanging, right, for repairs. Here's more great work by Angus. And we've got some squadron, maybe jumping into action there. An amazing amount of what you would call greeble work in model building. Stark use of the color red there. That is really something. I believe there are supposed to be people looking there. As usual, lots of great detail with his work. And there we have the final image. Again, this is from 1980. This has shown up on a Robert Silverberg novel cover, as I recall. They always had the backside as the same as the front. And that wraps up all of the reviews of these wonderful art books, books of adventure and exploration by Stephen Caldwell. Again, it was called the Galactic Encounters series. And I really hope you enjoyed this nice long YouTube video about these art books. I didn't really think of a shorter way to do it. I thought about breaking it up into pieces, but I really didn't want to do that. I just wanted to do one introduction and then show you all the books. And I hope you'll take the time to enjoy them. And if you did enjoy this video, I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. I'd like to thank you for stopping by and checking out this video with me. And please feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Constructive criticism and suggestions are always welcome, as well as compliments or anything else. And you have a nice day.